So, Deere-Wiman house. We're going to go back to close to the beginning and see this wonderful shot of the house as it looked when it was first built. It was built in 1872 for Charles Deere, his wife Mary, and their two young daughters, Anna and Catherine. And Charles was the son of John Deere. The property itself that Charles Deere purchased about 1870 consisted of 7 acres. And that's still the same 7 acres that we own now. We often get the question from people on tours that, oh, they must have had a beautiful view. They named the house Overlook because it overlooked downtown Moline, the Mississippi River, but most importantly, the John Deere plow works that you can see here. I always remind them that this was probably a view that Charles Deere liked, but it's not what I'd call beautiful. It was the factories, the Deere factories along the riverfront, and lots of smoke coming out of the old smokestacks. My feeling is if Charles Deere got up in the morning and didn't see smoke coming out of those smokestacks, he was down there finding out what was going on. But that 7 acres did overlook, have a majestic location. And that was very important to a Victorian landscape. Now, there were lots of different elements to a Victorian landscape. You wanted it to be picturesque, winding driveways with striking views. You wanted sidewalks going across the lawn, walkways, different gathering places on the grounds. One of those was the big lawn expanse that we still have, which is north of the house. And what I thought I'd do with the program tonight is we're kind of going to go around the house clockwise. There just wasn't a good way for me to show everything without getting kind of mixed up. So I'm gonna kind of mix in old and new photos from each side of the house. So this is the north side of the house. You were in the front of the house in that last picture, looking out at this lawn area. I did find several great shots taken out on that point. And you can see that the trees weren't nearly as grown up. And so you had a view of the river downtown and the plow factory when you were out on that point. And so we can see that they had a lot of picnics and parties out on that point. On the right photo, we've got Charles Deere with his back to us. And then this looks like quite a large group of all women having a party out on the point. But these are just great shots. Think though that it was the staff that worked for the Deeres that had to carry all those tables and chairs and all the food out to that point. Here's another great shot out on the point. This picture is dated July 4th, 1896. It said that there was a picnic on the point and fireworks in the evening. So Charles Deere had quite a festive 4th of July that year. And the young boy in the center there, that's Charles Deere-Wiman, his grandson. And then I recently found this photograph. That's Charles Deere on the far left. His grandson, one of the grandsons, maybe both of them are in this picture. But again, they had a big flagpole out on the point from the early 1900s. So they really used that point. To me, it looks down low on the right side. It looks like two little cannons. So they must have fired off cannons. So I wonder if this was a different 4th of July. Now, that big lawn area, there was a driveway that kind of curved around the point, going down through a ravine and exited on 10th Street. So that driveway exited out on 10th Street, and that driveway was that scenic drive that I mentioned being popular in the Victorian era. So you wound up through the ravine and would catch glimpses of the house as you went up. You can see that this wall is quite overgrown. There was a period where they did like that overgrown look. I do like these wood poles here along the street. I'm guessing those were to tie off a horse. Now, this shot I shared on our Facebook page. It's really a fun shot. That driveway I just showed you would have been fitted out on 10th Street, and 10th Street is running up through that deep ravine that you see at the bottom of the picture there. But you see the house, you see that picturesque steps going down the hillside. To the left, you see the carriage house, a greenhouse, all a very picturesque, again, landscape. Now we're going to go back up to the north side of the house, and let me back up and point out, you can see off here to the right at the top of the steps, there's a little gazebo. And then here's the gazebo, all overgrown, about the turn of the century. The reason I know it's turn of the century is the roof line has changed on the house. So we know it was after 1899. But that gazebo being out in the middle of the yard was really a way to create a living room in the middle of nature. And they really liked that idea in the late 1800s. So we see it pop up in 1880s photos. We also still see that gazebo sitting there as late as the 20s. I think it was there until at least the 30s or 40s before it was torn down. I wish we still had it. And then here, right by the spigot, the lawn spigot, right, water spigot, you can kind of see a little bit of a circle on the grass there. That's where the gazebo sat. And then the sidewalk ran straight up to the sidewalk up by the house. What I also think is interesting is we always put so much landscape right up around the foundation today in our homes. And we definitely have that here. Some of our earlier photos show that they didn't do that back in the Victorian era. They tended to leave it pretty bare with maybe some vines running up the porch rails.
Gretchen, are you okay to have questions in the middle, or would you like them held till later?
Whoops, let me back up. If you want to read the question to me, if it's a particular
Absolutely,
picture.
And it was relevant. What's considered the front of the Deere-Wiman home?
This side right here, the north side facing the river. That would be the front side of the house, not the side facing 11th Avenue.
Yeah, not the side we're used to entering from.
Yep. So this is the north side, the front of the house, facing away from 11th Avenue, facing towards the river. that would be considered the front of the house. But there was never a driveway that came up to the front steps. I think it was more formal entrance, and they used more the west entrance that you'll see in a little bit. So I wanted to show you the pool photo because it was an important part of the landscape. Built in 1917, was really kind of hidden from the house, but it was a spectacular building. And I think this is the program that Lisa's got me doing for the Moline Public Library in July. Now we're going to go over to the east side of the house and show you probably the oldest picture that I have of Deere-Wiman house. And this actually was loaned to me by the Deere Company archives. They found this picture and I was just floored when I saw it, because here we see the house being built. And you can see that the landscape hasn't been done yet. They've planted a few trees, but they've still got a lot to do. The driveway has been put in, but it's just a fascinating photo. I can't tell if the family has moved in yet, but it's just a great photo. Now let's go to how the house looked from about the same angle, a little bit farther back from, closer in from that last photo. But we can see the driveway coming around the south side of the house. We can see that there was a porch coming off the dining room here, this driveway coming around. Let's go to the next one, and we pull back just a little, same time period, where we see what I was talking about, those vines growing up on the porch. We also see the driveway curving back, and we see this hedge right here. That's where the main garden is today. And let's go to the next one. We see, again, we're jumping ahead to the 1940s from that same angle. The driveway's still there. The house has changed a little bit over here on the left side, but we can still see the hedge a little bit right here. And then we see the house today from that angle. That driveway still curving around. Here's the hedge along the main garden. And the trees are definitely bigger now. So I want to talk about a couple of structures and the main garden that's on the east side of the property. Here we are on the west side of the property looking east. We see the house, and then off to the right is the carriage house. But that's not the carriage house we have today. This is the carriage house that we have today. It was rebuilt in the early 1910s, we believe. And I love this picture. This was given to me by a gentleman who he used to work at the houses, and one of his descendants gave it back to us. But I love this because here they've got this wonderful landscaping up around the center here. These beautiful boxes hanging from the upper story. And you can see the two big garage doors. He also gave me this picture that shows the back side of the carriage house. Still those wonderful boxes with these long trailing vines. I wish we still had these boxes, but they'd be quite a job to fill and water. And then we see the carriage house today, where we've still got the big doors, the garage where the cars used to drive in, but we just have doors there now to the carriage house. And you can see that hedge with that big garden on the left. So let's talk a little bit about that garden. Here's another shot of the carriage house today and our main garden. When did that main garden appear on the property? Well, we know that there was a greenhouse here, and then on the other side would have been that garden. What did the greenhouses look like? We found this picture over at the Rock Island County Historical Society. It doesn't have a date. I'm placing it in the 1920s. It might be a little bit later, but I'm thinking early 20s. And it's a massive setup. We have in the front here with the stone building and a greenhouse right behind it. When I came to work here, this building was still up, and the greenhouse behind it was just behind the building. That was called the orchid house, where they grew their orchid. The two greenhouses right behind the orchid house. This last greenhouse with the conservatory dome at the one end, that was no longer there when I came in the 1980s. So I was thrilled to see this picture. And then they also had some beds out here to start plants. Now, what's also interesting, if you look over to the left, you see the hedge going around this, where the main garden is today. I can't tell what they were doing here with these posts and bars across the top. It doesn't look like it's a formal garden. It looks like they were growing something there, but I'm not sure what. We also see a 1950s photo of the two greenhouses that I told you about that were here in the 80s, and then the formal garden. Same way with the picture on the right, that was taken in 1979. We see the greenhouses and the formal gardens. And now that formal garden, you've seen this picture before, but we look over at the right along the driveway, and we see that hedge, and just over the hedge top, I see one of those poles that we saw in the earlier picture. So they had them back in the 1880s. But what did that garden look like? I have no photos of them other than those two little pieces where I see the poles. So I'm not sure if they really had a garden there. But we do now, and we know that it was in the 1920s that the Wymans, Charles Deere's grandson and his wife, laid out this garden with the brick path and the formal path. There's a little display in the center here that's filled in. That later they opened that up and put a little pond there. And then we see the gardens today. We still have the same brick paths, and we have that pond in the center, the benches here with the brick paths. I think the Deere-Wiman garden is my favorite in the early spring, when the peonies and the irises are blooming. That's when I really love this garden. And then the lilies start to bloom too. Lisa, I'm so glad that you mentioned the Lisianthus. I had to throw those in. We do plant Lisianthus in this garden around where that pond used to be. They're a wonderful annual in our area of the country. I've heard that in warmer climates, like down in Texas, that these will come back each year. And so they're more of a perennial there. We buy them already well established because they're very slow growing. We get them where they're probably a good 10 inches tall already, because you start them from seed in about October, and by the following spring, they're ready to plant in the garden at about 10 inches tall. Otherwise, we'd never have any flowers blooming on them, because it just would take too long for them to get to maturity enough to bloom. And then they're a great cut flower because they do really hold up well in arrangements.
And Gretchen, we know those gardens take a lot of work. And the next question that's come up in the chat is, how many horticulturists or gardeners does Deere-Wiman Butterworth Center employ today to maintain those?
Well, let's back up to the Lisianthus. Once they're planted, the one thing you've got to do is stake them. And so that takes some work. Then deadheading, just like any other flowering plant, you want to keep deadheading them so that they keep blooming, but they'll keep blooming until frost, which is what's great. So, you know, I don't think of them as being that much extra care versus some other plants. They do get full sun in this garden, so I think that's what they prefer. I've tried bringing you know, if we have a few extra, I'll bring them home and plant them. And I stake mine and they do just fine all summer. And I'm not a person that fusses a lot over my plants. I like to plant them and just let them grow. Far as gardeners, we have 2 full-time gardeners that work at Deere-Wiman and at Butterworth. Then in the summer months, we have 2 additional men that work, probably about 4 days a week, both of them. That's not near enough help because it takes a lot of work doing 7 acres at Deere-Wiman, another 2 acres at Butterworth. The parking lots we have to mow. So we have a lot of mowing to do, a lot of gardens. It's just a full-time job that we could definitely stand to have more people, but it just isn't in our budget to have as many as the Deeres and the Wymans and the Butterworths had long ago. They had quite a crew at both houses, but we don't have any trained horticulturists on our staff that work on the grounds crew. It's just gardeners that have spent a lot of time working on gardens and have learned a lot over the years. So we're going to start moving around. We've been on the east side. Now we're going to start moving around a little bit. And I wanted to show you this picture again with right here in the center of the house where the 3 girls are standing. That was a side porch. I'm not talking a lot about the house today, but I did want to talk about one room in the house that played an important part with the whole idea of nature and the Victorian landscape. And that's this building, or room. Clear off on the left side, you see a glass dome and a glass roof and glass windows here. That was a conservatory added to that corner in the actually this date's wrong, 1880s. It was more into the 1890s. And here's a great picture taken from the west side, and through the trees here, you can see the conservatory. We don't have any interior shots of the conservatory, but we know that it was packed with plants. Again, remember I talked about the gazebo outdoors in the north side of the house, how they created a living room out in the middle of nature. Well, the conservatory came in big because it was allowed you to bring nature inside. And that was very popular in the 1890s. In 1908, the conservatories were going out of style. And right here on the right side, with this balcony on the top, that replaced the conservatory, and they got rid of that and put on a breakfast room to the house. Now here's the south side of the house. Let me back up and show you this little tree just to the right of the second set of stairs here on the south side. This tiny little tree right here is a weeping mulberry tree. So we know that about 1908, 1910, it must have been planted. If you go just to the right of that little mulberry tree, you see this cast iron urn right here. I found these a few other pictures and they were in different locations. The reason I wanted you to notice those because here, just to the right of that steps, you see that weeping mulberry tree getting quite a bit bigger. And this picture is a modern photo. So we still have that weeping mulberry tree. It's over 100 years old now. It still produces mulberries. I have gone and eaten some of those mulberries myself. I like mulberries, but it's usually me, the squirrels, and the chipmunks who are picking up they pick up the ones that have dropped and I pick off the tree to eat. And then right to the right of the weeping mulberry, you see that cast iron urn. We know that during the winter months, the Wymans used to plant a small little evergreen in the pots and on the porch and this cast iron pot. Now we plant them with flowers in the summer too. Okay, so we're on the west side of the house. This is probably the second oldest photo that we have in our collection. It was definitely taken after they had moved in. We see the house off to the right there is again the carriage house, the first carriage house. What's interesting is we see the driveway come up and go out to the carriage house. We also see it come up and circle around the carriage entrance on the west side of the house. Around this way on the left side of the front of the house is where that front door was that we saw earlier. But you can see that the trees are newly staked. So I think this is, I'm guessing probably more to the late 1870s. Now, this picture has always puzzled me because it shows that same side of the house. There's not a porch just to the right of the porte cochere. It's that circle driveway you can see a little bit, but it looks kind of overgrown here. They didn't have John Deere tractors to mow the grounds then. They would have had push mowers, and so I think they kind of let the grounds get a little overgrown at times during that period. We also see this picture from 1887. You can't barely see the house up behind all these trees on the left, but you see the driveway winding up, and very faintly in the lower left-hand corner along the edge of the driveway, you see the millstones. Those were grinding stones that were used at the Deere & Company plow works for sharpening. And after they were no longer used at the factory, Charles Deere started lining his driveway with them. Here you can see those millstones again along the driveway here. Here you can see the porte cochere. They've added a porch here. But again, look, there's not much in the way of foundation plantings except for these vines growing up along the house, which was what they really liked in that period. Here's another candid shot that's taken by the porte cochere about 1900. This is Deere-Wiman, Charles Wyman's younger brother, so another grandson of Charles Deere. What I think's interesting here, we can see that one of the cast iron urns off to the far left, and it looks like they just chopped a tree down here. But again, look at those healthy vines running up the porte cochere. And then this is a great photo we have, really the only panoramic view that we have of the house, taken about 1900, where you can see that here we have 11th Avenue with a gate going in. This gate would have still been not the main gate, that's down on 10th Street, but the delivery entrance coming in the back side of the house. But you can see the house here, that driveway, and then off to the far right is the Deere-Wiman carriage house, the first carriage house. So again, very picturesque with the stone wall along here that lead into the driveway with the wonderful trees. We're glad they took this picture in the wintertime after all the leaves have fallen off the tree, or you wouldn't have been able to see the house. Now we're going to go back up close to the house because this is 1910s. We get a good look at those millstones. There were a lot more of them. What's interesting is a couple of these massive trees that are very close to the house. We don't have that tree anymore. I imagine it created problems. And I also like this photo from the 1920s. It shows a fountain off on the west side of the house with a couple benches just behind it here. This is the circle drive on the west side of the house, right behind here. And so this urn and fountain, we still have, although we don't run it as a fountain. Here you can see that fountain up here, the driveway leading up to the house with those millstones lining the driveway. And so here we see just a couple modern shots that I took just today, showing the outside of the house now and the grounds. Off here to the right is the carriage house today. So as you can see, we kind of made a circle around the house, showing you a little bit about the changing landscape. We believe that the first landscape done was by LeBaron Jenney, the same man who was the architect of the house. Jenney was also known for doing landscaping, and I believe that he did the landscape for Deere-Wiman, partly because on the east side of the property, there's some terracing. We know that Jenney designed the landscape for John Deere's house, which had some terracing. We also know that Jenney did the landscape design for Riverside Cemetery, which definitely has terracing on the front side of the cemetery. And so we're assuming that here we've got the house. Jenney is just starting to do his landscaping, and we can see that it was an incredible house, but a really majestic landscape that set the house off. And that, I think, is what Charles Deere wanted. He wanted a picturesque landscape with gardens, the driveways, lots of different kinds of trees, and also that big open lawn out to the north of the house so that they could really enjoy the property.
Gretchen, while we're trying to orient ourselves, the next question that came in said, what road is in the background with the houses? I presume it's this picture.
These houses over here, the property here, I think, goes a little farther west than it appears to, because Charles Deere property, let me back up to this picture. Here we see the house. This is 11th Avenue running along the front of the house. And here on the left, that's 8th Street going downhill. And on the left side of 8th Street is where Moline Public Hospital was. Those of you remember it, and was quite a large property, all owned by the Stevens house, and then became Moline Public. And now there's housing all through there. But those houses in the last picture sat over here on the left side, just to the left of the poles, the light poles. So let's go back to that, because that is really interesting how we see these houses. This looks clear to the left, looks like it could be part of a barn, and a good sized house over here. I've not been able to find, I need to go through some early maps again and see if I can find any names that own property along there. But it looks like it's quite close to the house, when in actuality, it's a good half block west or more. But those are good sized houses. And I wish I knew more about those. Now, farther over, there's where Lutheran Hospital used to sit, where there's now retirement buildings, retirement home. That area used to be called DeBalian's, if I'm pronouncing that right, Field. And there was a nursery there at one time, but then also a large field. And that's where there were some early baseball games that had huge crowds that would attend there. So all kind of interesting to look at these pictures. I look at the picture of the house, but you're right. All these things in the background are really interesting. And this mule or horse there, he doesn't look very well fed to me, but There he is, standing there by the house.
Thank you for joining us this month.